Welcome to the Neophyte in the Woods podcast with Andrew McDowell.
Welcome to another episode of the Neophyte in the Woods podcast, a proud member of the Change Your PFE podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Andrew McDowell, and we're gonna pivot, at least for the week, to another subject other than hunting that I'm personally very passionate about and excited about, and I hope you have interest in it too, which is practical shooting. For the uninitiated, this is a discipline of the shooting sports where a competitor shoots guns while moving through stages with the goal of minimizing time and maximizing score. There's a bunch of different practical shooting sports, things like 3-gun, multi-gun, cowboy action, IDPA, USPSA, IPSC. Basically, each of these games focuses on their own section, you could say, of shooting, or has some sort of twist that makes it different. For example, IDPA, or the International Defensive Pistol Association, focuses on defensive cover, use of special, different kinds of reloads, and kind of more quote-unquote practical shooting in a defensive sense. Although I shot this for a couple of years, and there was a preponderance of kind of little green men or zombie scenarios that sort of takes the piss out of that a little bit. But it's really focused on drawing your gun from concealment, engaging targets accurately and quickly, and moving from cover to cover and reloading in a quote-unquote tactical fashion. One of the other examples, cowboy action shooting, is more for people who want to shoot, single action army revolvers and percussion cap shotguns while wearing chaps and 10-gallon hats. And then there's the one we're going to talk about today, USPSA, which is the United States Practical Shooting Association, which is a branch of the International Practical Shooting Confederation, which is basically the kind of the granddaddy of all these practical shooting sports. USPSA, as I said, is the American arm of the International Practical Shooting Confederation. These matches are all about shooting pistols, moving through courses, and doing it really, really fast. IPSC and USPSA are the predecessors of the modern practical shooting competitions. So you'll see a lot of overlap. If you are familiar with one, you're going to be familiar with the broad strokes of USPSA and vice versa. The origins of this sport are in the American Southwest in the years following the Second World War. A group of shooting enthusiasts would literally gather into the desert to shoot guns. Like many of us, they started looking for competition or ways to compete, to push themselves and move on from punching paper. So they started what they were called leather slap matches, which were basically extremely limited rule matches with shooting 1911s at different types of targets. And basically whoever engaged all the targets the quickest won. After a while, even that, got boring. So they started to add more challenges and more rules, no-shoot targets, disappearing targets, pepper poppers, just to keep it more interesting. Before long, the sport that would become IPSC or USPSA would be formalized. And that formalization came with rules, lots and lots of rules. There's a whole little red book that people spend hours going over and memorizing, for both so that they can kind of game the system, but also so that they can help run events and matches to become an RO. What's important to note, as anytime we're dealing with guns, and no less here when we're walking around with them on our hips and shooting them quickly and running around, the main rule here above all others is safety. Again and again and again, as you go through practical shooting, safety is paramount. It matters more than any of the rules in the books, although most of the rules in the rule books are to keep you safe. But at the most basic level, the NRA safety rules still apply. These are things like keep the gun pointed in a safe direction at all times, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it, know your target and what's beyond it. In fact, if you violate any of these basic rules during a USPSA match, it's the quickest way to get disqualified, lose your entry fee, and look like a complete asshole in front of your peers. I have seen people get disqualified before a match has even begun. I've seen people get disqualified literally before they step out of their cars because they handled a gun without being supervised by an RO. They handled ammunition in a no ammunition zone, or they handled a gun outside of a safe area without kind of being under the direct supervision of a range officer. I would strongly encourage you not to be that person. I've been lucky enough to avoid it so far, but I know my time will come eventually. So past kind of the safety rules, the goal of USPSA is kind of balancing speed, power, and accuracy. That plays into how things are scored. At a most basic level, you're scored by your total time in seconds, plus any penalties in seconds. The higher the time, the lower your hit factor, which we're not going to talk about today because it's far too much math. But at a basic level, hit factor means how well you're doing relative to the standard set by kind of everybody else out there. If you have a high hit factor on a stage, it means you did really well. If you have a low hit factor on a stage, it not so much. It's a way of just comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, within a stage or the folks you're competing with or shooting with on the squad. One other part, and we're not going to go into this in depth except to kind of breeze through how it's calculated, is something we take into account with scoring called power factor. Again, at a kind of a most simple level, power factor is a way of saying you get more points for a given successful hit for shooting a more powerful round. It's what comes out of the end of a formula. Basically, to calculate this is you take the weight of your bullet in grains, multiply that by the muzzle velocity of your ammunition in feet per second, and then divide that number by 1,000. That's how you calculate power factor. It's designed to level the playing field in terms of recoil. Larger bullets mean slower follow-up shots because you're going to deal with more recoil. Smaller bullets have less recoil, easier to get back on target. So it gives the larger rounds, the 45s, the 40s, a little bit more leniency. So in scoring, if you hit something dead center of mass, actually that's a bad example. I'll just use the numbers without getting into hit zones. A hit that's worth 3 points for a small bullet is going to be worth 4 points for a large one, and so on. the minimum power factor that we consider in USPSA is what we would call minor, and it's about 125. So your Winchester white box would probably be hitting minor power factor pretty comfortably. I know some manufacturers are actually putting up boxes of factory ammo that are designed to squeak, designed for USPSA shooters to squeak by minimum power factor. And major power factor is about 165. It's actually exactly 165. Again, white box 45 will hit power factor of 165. Local matches are, in my experience, a little bit more loosey-goosey with this. As long as you can, handle your gun safely and you're not literally shooting, a mouse fart 22. They'll let you shoot pretty much whatever you bring. Major matches, state, national, regional, are more script. They actually have chronograph stages that are going to hold you to making power factor. And this power factor discussion kind of weighs into something else, of kind of one of the key parts of USPSA. And one of the givens as it's built today is that you're not going to compete against folks who are shooting higher, shooting outside your class. That is to say, there are divisions in USPSA, and it's designed to make it a little bit more fair for competitors. So basically, it doesn't make sense, or it isn't fair for somebody to shoot, say, an off-the-shelf M&P 9mm full size. It wouldn't be fair for them to be competing directly against somebody with a $4,000 or $5,000 race gun shooting super comp ammo with a red dot. It wouldn't be fun for the person shooting an off the shelf gun, and it wouldn't be any particular challenge for somebody shooting a race gun. So we break in USPSA, we broke the competitors down into divisions. They're as follows. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. For example, revolver. It's a revolver-only division. You can use a speed loader. You can load by one round at a time, and there are different rules for major and minor bullets and loads. About how many rounds you can have in the gun. The next up was what I kind of consider to be the introductory division to USPSA. This is what I shot all of last year and will probably shoot this year. It's called production. This is the division with off-the-shelf pistols. There's a discrete list of guns that are production guns, and USPSA provides that. There's no heavy-duty pistol smithing here. You can make internal modifications. You can do a stipple job to your grip. You can change the sights, but past that, it's really intended to be a straightforward off-the-shelf gun. My M&P has a trigger job just because in Massachusetts the stock trigger on an M&P is about 150 yards of grit, and it's just really unpleasant to shoot. So I had a gunsmith work on it, and it's real smooth and real nice now. The other thing about this division is that there are no high capacity or standard capacity magazines. You're limited to 10+1. This is again to help people like me who are behind an iron curtain with capacity, just so that we're not competing against somebody who has 17 rounds in a magazine, so they have to reload less. Where people in production lose a lot of time is reloads, and you can actually make up a lot of time if you do fast, accurate, smooth reloads. It's somewhere just where I try to pick up a little bit of time because my reloads are pretty smooth. Not as good as some folks, but for me, for somebody who's been shooting this for a year now, they're pretty good. The other thing to keep in mind about production is that there's no benefit to shooting a heavier bullet. If you have a 45, Glock or M&P, you don't get the major power factor for that. Everything in production is scored minor, again, just to level the playing field. The next division is what they call single stack. It's literally the 1911 club. You can only shoot 1911s in this. They could be major or minor, but it's literally 1911s only. No Browning high powers, 1911s. These pistols are standard designs, so you can't port the barrels, you can't put red dots on them, and the holsters that you use, like in production, are kind of duty holsters. You can't get those tricky drop holsters that just barely hold the gun in there. The race holsters. It's straight production, straight duty style. Holsters. It's 8-round magazines for major and 10 rounders if you want to shoot minor. If you have a 1911, jump right in. I'm planning on reloading and shooting 1911 this year, here and there. Next up is limited and limited 10. This is where we start to get into the quote-unquote race gun territory. It's mostly the same as production with two big changes. There's no limit on the capacity of magazines, so if you have a 17 or or greater magazine capacity, load it up, go for it. As long as there's a box with certain measurements, as long as the magazine fits in there, you're good. Those big long 31, 32 round Glock stick mags aren't probably going to fly in limited and limited. Limited 10 is obviously the limited division with a 10 round maximum. The other kind of big difference from production is that you can use race holsters. So these are, I've referred to them before, specially designed holsters that allow for faster than regular draws. They just barely hold onto the gun. It's basically like a little lever that flips up. So this is a little bit more gamery, if you will, approach to USPSA. And then we have open. This is the Wild West. Anything goes as long as it's safe. You want to put a red dot on your gun, go for it. Huge muzzle brake, go for it. You want to shoot a double stack, 45, go for it. The so-called 2011, 1911 pattern pistols are big here. People spend, I'm not exaggerating, $4,000 and $5,000 for an entry level open gun. People will spend $10,000 or more on it. These are kind of the gamers, so the ones who want to go fast and want to compete with the best of the best. There's a restriction on the length of the magazine. It's 171.25 millimeters is the maximum. But as long, you can fit as many bullets in that as you can, and that's fine. Open is for people who hate to reload, basically. Right now, there's 2 provisional divisions that may become permanent divisions, may not become permanent divisions. It's a little bit hard to say right now. They're called carry optics, which are, as the name would imply, pistols with carry optics on them, so a red dot. RMR, that type of optic on it. Mostly follows production rules, with obviously differences for the type of sights that you can stick up there. The other is called pistol caliber carbine. It's, as the name would imply, shooting rifles in a pistol match, as long as they're pistol caliber. It's scored minor. I'm actually lucky enough to shoot with one of the top ranked pistol caliber carbine shooters in the country at my club. And he blazes. He has an SBR with an optic, and it's truly amazing to see him shoot. Where it'll take me 45 seconds to shoot a stage, he does it in 15. He's really fast and really good, and he doesn't miss. So I like doing scorekeeping for him because it's just 2 alpha, 2 alpha, 2 alpha, 2 alpha. It's pretty cool to see. And that kind of at a really basic level are the broad strokes of USPSA. As we get more towards the kind of the shooting season up here in Massachusetts, we shoot from April-ish, if there's no snow, through October or November, depending on the weather. But as we get further into the episodes, I'm going to talk about more of what we said there, and hopefully have some nationally ranked, if I can convince them to come on, or at least better shooters than I am, on to talk about how they got into the sport and what they like about it. So I hope you'll tune into that. Before we go, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about how I got into this sport. Basically, I got into this sport before I got my license to carry or even bought a gun. I was clicking around the internet one day in grad school and came across this sport. I don't remember what blog I was on or what I was looking at, but it was people shooting pistols really fast and shooting at targets and moving around cover, and it just seemed really cool. And it took me a few years to get to where I competed in it. But once I did, I started to have a blast. I actually started with IDPA, and for a couple of years running, took an intro course and shot a couple of matches, but it wasn't for me. I know a lot of people who love shooting IDPA and are really good at it, but for me, the rules just didn't make sense. One of the kind of the straws that broke the camel's back for me in IDPA was, they talk about it being tactical, and they talk about it being, real world gunfighting learning. But one of the rules is that you have to reload behind cover, regardless of where you go dry. So if you're moving from cover A to cover B and you're shooting as you go, and you go dry in the middle of a 5-yard kind of open area, you have to get to cover before you reload, and then re-engage the targets. It doesn't make sense. If I'm, God forbid, in a gunfight somewhere and I run dry in the open, I'm going to reload in the open, and I'm going to, keep shooting while I move to cover. And that sort of soured me on the sport. Also, I couldn't get my head around how it's scored, even though it's just straight point up and point down. So I kind of stepped back and just really focused on, recreational kind of plinking. And then I joined a club where I'm still a member, and they had a very active practical shooting USPSA club, and they meet the first Saturday of every month. The match runs from about 9 a.m. until 2. I'd be in the woods hunting turkey, and I'd hear them shoot, and it just sounded really cool. And then I was lucky enough to get an email from them about an intro course that I took last year, and I shot that and had an absolute hoot, learning about it and just really, really enjoyed it. And I shot all last year. I missed 2 matches in the 2 months following the birth of my kid, but I was there for every other match in the year, and it was great. I did have a really great time, and I learned a lot about how to shoot and how to shoot fast and how to shoot accurately. Not enough to not finish in the bottom third every time, but that all comes with practice. And then I loved it so much that this year I took the step to start to become an RO, as safety officer or range officer. I've actually got the test right here in front of me that I need to finish. So I decided to take that on so that I could help the club out with running matches and start to learn a little bit more about the rules, so that maybe I could take advantage of the loopholes and shoot it a little bit more aggressively. So it's a little bit to help folks out, but it's a lot bit to help me out. The other great thing about being an RO is that a lot of clubs, if you run a match, run a squad, or keep score, they'll give you money off of your match fee. So at my club, it's $20. So if you RO, help set up, or run the scorekeeper, you shoot for $10. If you do 2 of those things, so if you say run, score, and help set up the day before, you shoot for free, which is a pretty good deal. Shoot 6, 7, 8 matches a year, plus ammo, it starts to add up pretty quick. So if you're, I'm going to say thrifty, I think other people would say cheap, like me, it's a great way to shoot more for less. one of the other things that, excites me about this is, you can really customize your loads a lot. I've been for years talking about getting into reloading, and I have a press that my wife gave me for Christmas one year, and I've kind of dithered and stepped back and forth about doing it. And, seeing people basically shoot the same weapons platform that I shoot and have substantially less recoil and are able to get follow-up shots faster because they reload is pretty good incentive for me to jump in and start reloading. So I have my press set up and just about dialed in for a 45 load that I'm going to shoot this year. So that's all coming for me. I just got to, again, finish that off and find the time to do it. And that's it. That's sort of my experience with USPSA. I hope to become a C class shooter. There's a classification system where it goes D, C, B, A, Master, Grandmaster. Basically from the shooters who suck like me all the way through the top of the people who are the best of the best and compete for big money and big prizes on the national stage. And that's kind of the I'm going to call it a USPSA primer in a nutshell. Next up we're gonna talk a little bit more about the divisions and some of the gear that you need and some of the basic drills that you can do to help you compete, and how to find a club will probably be the kind of the next few topics we talk about. So thanks for tuning in. As always, please subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes. We have the Patreon that's linked to in the show description. So if you have a couple extra bucks that you want to throw our way, it would be very much appreciated. We do this for the love of it, but if we can help defray our costs a little bit, it'll certainly help the overall quality of the product. I bought a new microphone with basically my own money that we could have been covered with Patreon. If we have special, my buddy Jeff Adamek just went to a podcast festival. That's the type of stuff that we can do and get better content if we have Patreon patrons. So if you want to help us put out a better product, we'd love your support through Patreon. You can get it in the show description. I'm still raising money for Kids Cancer Buzz Off, so if you have a few bucks there and want to help me help pediatric cancer patients and their families get through a tough time, I hope that you'll consider donating. And that link will be in the description below as well. So thanks for tuning in. Next week, we'll be back to kind of more typically scheduled programming. We're going to sit down with Jeff Adamek, and we're going to talk about a famous rifle that was in use by the United States Army for multiple decades. If you guess it, you get a cookie, I guess. So tune in for that, and we have more good content coming up. So thanks for tuning in, and stay safe.